Hey guys, welcome back to Fix It Friday. So this week we're going to be talking about the NES, and this is probably one of my favorite consoles of all time, and I can't really believe that it's about to turn 40 years old this year. So in the past on this channel I've covered the Opentendo, and that is an open source recreation of the original NES. Now, what we're going to be doing today is going over a new project that was developed by Zaxour, who I've covered also on the channel before. So what Zaxour has done is he's modified the Opentendo to create an SMD version of it called the SMTendo. So it has a number of nice features which I'll cover in a moment, and I have this NES over here which has nothing in it. It's just an empty shell. There's no motherboard, there's no nothing. And so what we can do with this is build a completely modern NES with the exception of the two custom chips. We're also going to pair it with this power block right here, which is also made by Zaxour. And this also has a number of really cool features, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And then finally, we're going to be pairing all of this with the NESRGB. And I've covered this a million times before as well. This gives an NES the best quality video and audio and lets you easily use it up with a scaler. All right, so let's get started. All right, so before I get into it, I just want to kind of go over some of the features of the SMTendo and what makes it different from the original Opentendo project. So, I mean, the first obvious thing which you guys can see is that almost every component on this board is surface mount soldered. So what's nice about this is that it has a much smaller footprint. It's an open source project, so you can actually have a board like this pre-populated by places like PCBWay or JLC PCB. And so that just gives you a much easier project to start off with, because like with the original Opentendo, everything is through hole, and you did have to transfer over some parts from the original NES. And so that just takes a lot more time, and it's also easier to make mistakes. Whereas with this particular board, everything is pretty much there. All you need to supply is the CPU, the PPU, and if you feel like it, you can supply the expansion connector right here. There's other advantages to this as well. So it has these solder pads over here and over here that make it really easy to use with the NESRGB. So you can see that the expansion audio is built in, and it's fully buffered, and you can just tap in right over here to get your audio and put that into the NESRGB. And then the NESRGB also has in-game reset and palette swapping, and so you can also very conveniently just solder right here to access those points instead of coming up to the connector. So really nice quality of life features to this particular design. The other thing that's nice about it is you don't need a lockout chip. That's already built in with the null CIC, which is installed on the board. And unlike the original NES, this board is a 4-layer board, which means that power and ground are on their own planes. What's nice about that is that you have much better electromagnetic interference shielding versus the original design. So that means like composite video should be better, like just in general, all of the video and audio signals have better isolation. All right, so let's talk about the power block for a minute. So this is a power supply replacement that Zaxour has also developed. And so this is pretty similar to what Merlin Shaw has done in the past. It's a similar kind of idea anyhow. So what's cool about this is that you can use it default for just composite video if you're just trying to make a stock NES. You can also pair it up with the NESRGB using this point right here and basically have all of the analog signals go through this Saturn connector. Or if you want, you can also use Copper Dragon's new Lumacode solution, which gives you HDMI from your NES. So just like the SMTendo board, it's a 4-layer circuit board, so that helps with EMI shielding and having everything isolated. It's got this THS 7314 chip, which I think is right over here, one of these two, sorry, which is used for the composite video. So the composite video on this looks better than it does on a stock NES. So yeah, it's a really nice solution. And also it comes with a header too. So you really need absolutely nothing from the original power supply on the front loader. You can just solder this thing in. So yeah, it's definitely a pretty cool project that I'm looking forward to trying. So yeah, like I said earlier, this is just a shell. There is nothing in here. I managed to get a shell. I don't remember what happened to the console, but I ended up using it for parts for fixing something else, and now I have this nice spare shell. So it's the perfect candidate for a project like this. So you might be asking yourself, okay, well, where are you going to be getting the custom NES chips? Well, I'm going to be getting them from here. So this is a Famicom board that I have. It came from a absolutely disgusting, broken Famicom. The circuit board, as you can see, looks pretty much fine, but the shell of the Famicom was wrecked. I got this for really, really cheap from Yahoo Auctions Japan. I think I bought like a couple of these. So yeah, it's like a waste to kind of have them in here on an RF only system without a shell. So I'm going to take out these perfectly good parts and transplant them into the SMTendo. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started with the desoldering process. All right, so first order of business is removing these two chips. This is probably the most difficult part of building the SMTendo. If you want, there are people out there that sell the chips pre-removed, and that's something I can also do as well, if it's something that you just don't have the skill or the tools to do. But let me show you how I remove these chips. So there's really 3 steps to it. The first step is to add fresh solder to all of the pins. The second step is to use my Hakko FR301 desoldering gun just to clear out the vias as much as possible. And then usually there's a little bit of solder left behind. So the final step I'll do is use a heat gun just to kind of loosen and soften up the remaining little fragments of solder. And then that allows me to lift out the chip without too much trouble. All right, so let's get this thing started. Okay, so we've got our CPU and our PPU extracted, and that wasn't really all that difficult. And I've just set aside that Famicom board, and I'm going to keep that for spare parts. So next thing I'm going to do is just turn my attention over to the POW block. So there's a few things that we need to do. We're going to solder in this 5-pin header. So it goes like this, and we just need to solder it in right here, just making sure that this thing is straight and not like wobbly. The other thing we're going to do is we have to close out a jumper over here. So these jumpers control what happens with composite video on the Saturn port. So if I close jumper 1, I get composite video from the NESRGB. If I close jumper 2, then I get Lumacode from the Lumacode connector. So in this case, I'm not doing Lumacode. I'm going to be doing composite video. So let's just go ahead and close that so that we have NESRGB composite video. Okay, that's all done. Just flip this guy over and solder this thing in. All right, so the final bit of soldering we need to do on the POW block relates to this little point right here. So this is actually where the ground goes. With the original NES modulator, there is no soldered ground connection because the physical can makes contact with the ground plane of the motherboard. So you need this little wire here to connect them, because without that, you don't have any ground and nothing happens. So for this step, I like to use a thicker conductor. I don't think it's a good idea to use a thin conductor just because you're trying to make sure that you have a solid ground here between the 2 points. So just solder that in real quick. And then we're gonna put this, we're not actually gonna solder this down, we're just kind of test fitting and making sure. So what I'm going to do now is solder it in over here. This is actually where the original RF modulator would go, is right in this point right here. So we're just going to connect it up to the ground plane of the SMTendo. Okay, so let me just solder this in a little bit better as well. Okay, so now that that's all done, I'm actually going to install these two parts into the shell so that I can basically test fit everything and then solder in these two boards together. Okay, so you can see now I've taken the SMTendo and the POW block and I've screwed it in completely into the bottom shell. So just made sure all of the screws were attached so that everything is exactly the way it would be if this thing was finalized and fully assembled. So now that that's done, I can now solder in these connections because I know everything is exactly at the right height and the right place for this particular shell. Okay, so that's all finished. If I tilt this, hopefully this is coming through on camera, but you can actually see the little ground wire that I've installed that connects the two boards together. So like this, it's pretty out of the way and unobtrusive. So a lot of the work is actually finished now. So the next thing we're gonna do is we need to rewire the power and reset PCB with a new harness so that it connects into the SMTendo board. All right, so the basic SMTendo is almost done. There's two other steps which are kind of optional. If you want to do them, you can do them, but you also don't have to. So one has to do with this expansion connector. This is something that's on all front loaders, and you can remove this from a front loader and put it on here, but it's kind of a pointless thing. It doesn't actually really do all that much. There's some modern stuff that uses it now, but not really anything much. So if you're not going to use it, in my opinion, it's not worth the time of removing and swapping that in. So I'm not going to bother in this particular installation. The other thing has to do with the power and reset button on the shell. So there's this proprietary Nintendo connector that normally goes here. So if you've got a front loader, you can pull that off and you can install it. But if you get this board from Zaxour, it already comes pre-soldered with this connector here, which is perfectly nice and easy enough to use. So what I'm going to do is take the power and reset off and basically remove this harness and install the new one. So installing it is actually pretty easy. If you look on the side of this PCB, there are numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They're in a not sequential kind of order. That's because they correspond to these points on the board, which go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So soldering these up correctly just means plugging it in like this and going by color and going 1 through 5. So let's go ahead and do that right now. All right, so we're ready to do an initial test. I thought it would make sense just to test the console as is in like a kind of stock NES state before we like add the RGB and all that cool stuff. So yeah, I just put the chips into their respective sockets and we're ready to go. Let's go ahead and turn this thing on and see what it does. Okay. So that's great. We've got our composite video, and this is the composite video being generated by the POW block. So let me pick a game that looks really beautiful because it'll help to kind of highlight the composite here. Let me just go to Little Samson because it's just very, especially the opening scene of Little Samson's really nice. So let's just do that real quick. All right, sound is working, so that's good. All right, so I'm gonna just turn off the sound real quick because I just want to look at the video here. But yeah, I'm hoping you can see that the video here is really sharp for composite. So if you're familiar with composite video from the NES, it has kind of like these artifacts and it's a little bit smudgier than what you're seeing here. So this is in part due to the better EMI shielding and the better board layout design versus the original NES. And then there's also a really nice composite amplifier on the power block, which results in this very, very clean composite video signal. So yeah, this looks really, really good. And I mean, hopefully you can see that this is a lot easier to make versus the standard Opentendo, just because with that, you have to manually solder everything yourself. Whereas with this, you know, really you just have to get the CPU and PPU and drop it in, and there's really not too much to do in order to have a Opentendo completed. So this is great. Now I know that the console works, everything's great. So let's go ahead now and move on to adding RGB. All right, so we have the NES RGB board here, and you can see that I've taken the pins that come with that kit, and I've stuck them into the dual wipe socket that's installed on the SMTendo. So a lot of this is going to be very, very similar to a standard NES RGB install. So first thing I'm going to do is just solder in these rows of pins. I'm also going to clip these so that they're not as tall as they currently are right here. Then I'll solder in the PPU, and I'm going to get a whole bunch of jumpers also closed up, and then from there we're going to just kind of proceed to the next step. All right, so we're actually just about done here. There's only a few things left that we need to do. So before I jump into that, let me just talk a little bit about the jumpers that I closed. So if you're doing an NES RGB install, you got to close J3 for power, J5 for NTSC region. I have J1 closed because I'm going to be using button combinations to change palettes and reset the console. And I also have J6 closed because this is a front loader and it uses a different style for reset than Famicom or any of the other NES designs. So yeah, now all those jumpers are closed. And so the last things that we got to do is we're going to install this little board right over here. So this basically taps into all of the video and audio signals, sends them along a flex cable, and then this flex cable connects up to the POW block. So that sends all of the video signals and audio signals to the Saturn DIN connector. There's also a jumper over here. So it's actually already bridged because the NES does not produce stereo sound. It makes mono sound. So this sends the mono sound to the left and the right speaker. If, however, let's just say you wanted to do a stereo mod or a pseudo stereo mod where you break out the two voices to one channel and the other two to the other, you could actually cut this jumper and send left audio one way and right audio another way. That's definitely not a normal way of doing things, but it's something that is possible with the NES. But yeah, for today, I'm not interested in really doing that. I'm just going to use mono sound. So let's go ahead and take care of these connections here. So we're going to first go ahead and solder in this header, and then we'll move on to the final step. All right, so we're at the end. The last little things we need to do is solder in audio from the SMTendo to the NESRGB, and we also need to connect the NESRGB to the Player 1 control port. So, like I was saying earlier in the video, all of this stuff is very conveniently located over here and over here. So you don't have to, wire things up to the controller port or, directly to the CPU. You can just use these pads and it's very convenient. So let's go ahead and make those connections. I already added one here. This is the expansion audio, so that's going to go, right over here. And then we have A and B, which go to their corresponding points, and everything is clearly labeled, so you can just match it. So this is latch, clock, data, and reset, and those correspond to the pads here on the NESRGB. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get those wired in and have a look at the final results. Okay, so it's all done and it looks absolutely stunning. Just thought I'd show you the final connections before we assemble the console. So you can see the audio over here, and it's very self-explanatory. You just wire in A to A, B to B, expansion to expansion, very simple. And the same goes true here for the player one connections and for the palette reset. So for the reset. So you just go from reset to reset, data to data, etc., etc. So super, super clean design. Then the final thing to show you really quick is just how everything connects in with the PAL block. So you just take the flex cable and you insert it like this with the blue side facing up towards you. And yeah, that's it. This thing is basically ready to go. So let's go ahead and install it in a shell, and I'll show you the final little things that need to be done. Okay, so the console has been installed in the shell, but there's just like a small amount of trimming that needs to be done in order to have this thing put in safely. So I'm just lifting it up to show you. But you see this post right here, there's like a little bit of this ribbing here, which is like support. It needs to be cut off because if you leave it in, it's gonna actually potentially damage the flex cable. So once that little piece is trimmed off, you can see the flex cable stays nice and straight. There's no issues. So that's really it. The only other thing which could potentially be done is right over here with the RF port in the back. So as you can see, it's kind of narrow here. So it can be drilled out with like a stepper drill, or another alternative is if you basically trim the shielding on your Saturn RGB cable, then it'll fit in here without any issues. So that's probably what I'm gonna do in this case, because I'd rather do that than, drill out the shell. It lets the shell stay original, there's no cutting involved, and I'd rather cut a cable, or not really, just like a minor trim to the shielding on the cable versus cutting the shell. So yeah, let me go ahead and do that really quick, and then we'll finalize this thing and give it a test. All right, so I've got the console fully assembled, and on the outside, everything looks perfectly normal, but of course, under the hood, we know that we've got the SMTendo there. I've got the EverDrive in here for some testing, so let's give it a shot. Okay, looking good. So our RGB comes up, and everything is looking very sharp and crisp. So first thing I want to do is just test out expansion audio. So for that, I'm going to pick Castlevania 3 from Japan. Probably one of the best games for testing audio. Yeah. So yeah, this looks and sounds absolutely perfect. So the RGB coming out of the NESRGB looks really crisp. The sound sounds great with the 47K buffered audio. And yeah, there's like nothing to complain about here. I'm gonna just pause really quick, and then if you hold select and start and hit the right button, you can toggle between different palettes. And then of course, if you hold all three of those buttons down for like 3 seconds, you go back to the default. And personally, I always just stay on the default because it looks really good. And then if you hit select start A and B, it'll reset the console and bring you back to the main menu. So yeah, everything is working exactly as I would expect. Let me just turn off the sound really quick. But yeah, I can't express just how pleased I am with this whole thing. I mean, it looks and sounds great, and I really like how much easier it is now to build an Opentendo from scratch using the SMTendo. So with the original, I absolutely love that as well, but it's definitely for advanced installers only, just because there's so much that can go wrong when you put one of those together, and you have to solder every single thing by hand. Whereas with this, you can have most of the stuff pre-assembled, and then all you need to really do is just add the custom chips and a few small things. So it definitely makes the project a lot easier for a novice to complete. All right, so that's it for this week's video. If you guys like this kind of content, consider subscribing to the channel. I have videos out like this on a fairly regular basis. And then of course, if you have a console that you need repaired or modified, or if you want me to build you one of these, you can always reach me directly at oneuprestorations.com. All right, thanks again for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one.